The first light of dawn crept through the cheap Venetian blinds of their modest Phoenix apartment, casting striped shadows across Sarah Martinez's bedroom. At 12 years old, she had become an expert at reading silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes about the fractures beneath a family's surface. Her room was a carefully curated sanctuary, a defensive architecture of carefully placed photographs and strategically arranged mementos. On her nightstand, a single framed picture told a story of what once was, a smiling family of 3, before everything changed. The photograph was now a relic, a memory preserved behind glass, its edges slightly yellowed, capturing a moment before the truth began to unravel. Sarah's mother, Elena, worked double shifts as a medical records administrator, her resilience etched into the lines around her eyes. Each morning, she would leave before Sarah woke, her movements calculated to minimize noise, to avoid disturbing the delicate emotional ecosystem of their home. The apartment walls seemed to hold their breath, preserving the fragile peace that could shatter with a single misplaced word. Robert Martinez was a different kind of presence, even in absence. A high-profile real estate developer in Phoenix, he was a man who understood the art of presentation long before he understood the meaning of genuine connection. His professional photographs adorned local business magazines, perfectly pressed suits, a calculated smile that never quite reached his eyes, the embodiment of success and control. Their divorce had been a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy. No public scenes, no messy revelations, just a clean, strategic separation that maintained Robert's impeccable reputation. He was the kind of man who could transform a potential scandal into a narrative of professional dedication and familial sacrifice. But Sarah knew differently. She had become a collector of moments, tiny fragments of truth that didn't align with the polished narrative her father presented to the world. A misplaced receipt, an overheard phone conversation, a subtle change in body language during weekend visits, these were the pieces of a puzzle she was slowly, meticulously assembling. Her green eyes, inherited from her mother, missed nothing. They were windows to an intelligence that ran deeper than her years, a perceptiveness that made adults uncomfortable. Sarah had learned early that survival meant observation, that safety lay in understanding the unspoken rules of her fractured family dynamic. The weekends with her father were a performance, carefully choreographed visits to expensive restaurants, structured activities that looked perfect from the outside. Robert would pepper their conversations with business anecdotes, lessons about success and strategy, always watching her reactions, always measuring her response. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. Sarah could feel it in the way her mother's hands would tremble slightly when discussing the upcoming custody hearing, in the way her father's smile would become just a millimeter too tight when certain topics arose. Something was coming, a confrontation that had been years in the making. Little did anyone know that Sarah Martinez was about to become the earthquake that would shake everything to its foundation. The Maricopa County Courthouse stood as a monument to judicial process, its marble columns and hushed corridors a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Courtroom 4B. Robert Martinez arrived precisely at 9:15 a.m., his arrival a carefully orchestrated entrance that commanded attention without seeming deliberate. His charcoal Tom Ford suit, tailored within an inch of perfection, was more than clothing, it was armor. Each pressed line, each subtle pinstripe, was a weapon in his arsenal of perception management. Robert understood the psychology of first impressions better than most lawyers understood the law. He was a master of visual storytelling, and today's narrative would be his masterpiece. Elena sat 3 rows back, her posture a study in contained desperation. Wearing a simple navy blazer from a discount store, she looked small, almost invisible, exactly as Robert had always intended. Her court-appointed legal aide, a young public defender named Marcus Rodriguez, shuffled papers with an anxiety that did not go unnoticed by Robert. As Robert took the stand, the courtroom's ambient temperature seemed to shift. His voice, a carefully modulated baritone that had closed million-dollar real estate deals, filled the space with practiced sincerity. "Your Honor," he began, his tone a perfect blend of humility and conviction, "I come before this court not as a wealthy businessman, but as a father desperate to maintain a meaningful relationship with my daughter." The documents he presented were a testament to strategic preparation, bank statements showing consistent child support payments, meticulously timed and precisely calculated. Character references from prominent Phoenix business leaders, each letter crafted to paint him as a model of paternal dedication. Psychological evaluations that subtly questioned Elena's emotional stability, without making direct accusations. His primary exhibit was a series of text messages and emails, carefully curated to demonstrate Elena's supposed volatility. A message where she had used capital letters during an argument became evidence of emotional instability. A missed child support payment from 3 years ago was reframed as a temporary financial hardship, while his own momentary lapses were strategically omitted. Marcus Rodriguez recognized the manipulation, found himself strategically outmaneuvered. Each objection would make him appear confrontational. Each challenge would potentially undermine Elena's credibility. Robert had constructed a narrative, so meticulously that challenging it seemed almost impossible. Judge Catherine Hernandez, a veteran of family court with 23 years of experience, listened with a carefully neutral expression, but even her seasoned perception was being tested by Robert's performance. His ability to transform potentially damaging information into a narrative of paternal sacrifice was nothing short of remarkable. Sarah, seated in the gallery between her maternal grandmother and a court-appointed advocate, watched her father with eyes that missed nothing. While others saw a devoted father fighting for his rights, she saw the performance for what it truly was, a calculated manipulation, a dance of deception choreographed with surgical precision. The courtroom became Robert's stage, and he was delivering the performance of his life. Every gesture, every carefully chosen word was designed to reinforce a singular narrative. He was the victim, a loving father systematically denied his fundamental right to parent. And nobody, not yet, suspected the storm that was about to break. The memories came in fragments, sharp-edged pieces of a broken mirror that Sarah had learned to reassemble in secret. Her mind was a carefully maintained archive of moments most people would prefer to forget. She remembered the night 3 years ago when everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic scene of violence, but something far more insidious. Her father had cornered her mother in the kitchen of their old house, his voice a razor-sharp whisper that sliced through the silence. "No one will ever believe you," he had said, his hand gripping a stack of documents so tightly the edges began to curl. Sarah had been 10 then, old enough to understand, young enough to be terrified. The weekend visits became a psychological minefield. Her father's approach to parenting was less about connection and more about control. Each interaction was a carefully constructed lesson. Success is about perception, he would tell her, adjusting her posture during dinner at expensive restaurants. People see what you want them to see. These visits followed a precise script: expensive meals at top Phoenix restaurants, carefully curated conversations about his business achievements, subtle comments about her mother's financial struggles. Each word was a calculated weapon, designed to chip away at her perception of reality. She had begun collecting evidence, not out of malice, but survival. A crumpled receipt showing a different address than the one he claimed. A voicemail accidentally left on her phone where he discussed financial manipulations with someone. Fragments of conversations overheard during late-night phone calls. Her mother, Elena, bore the weight of these years with a resilience that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Sarah had watched her work double shifts, pursue night classes, all while maintaining a calm exterior that disguised the constant financial and emotional pressure. The upcoming custody hearing was more than a legal proceeding, it was a battlefield, and Sarah was the only one who truly understood the terrain. Her green eyes, inherited from her mother, missed nothing. She had become an expert at reading between the lines, at understanding the language of omission and carefully constructed narratives. While adults spoke, she listened not just to their words, but to the spaces between those words. Robert's performance in the courtroom was masterful. He presented himself as the ideal father, successful, dedicated, emotionally available. But Sarah knew the truth was a labyrinth of calculated manipulations. The pressure built inside her like steam in a sealed container. Each moment in the courtroom felt like a tightening spring, ready to release with catastrophic force. The secrets she carried were no longer just memories. They were weapons. And she was about to use them. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was not just another court-appointed psychologist. With 15 years of experience in complex family dynamics, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to read what remained unspoken. The evaluation room was sterile, white walls, a single window overlooking the Phoenix skyline, 2 chairs positioned at precise angles. Sarah sat like a carefully balanced sculpture, her body language speaking volumes before a single word was uttered. "Tell me about your family," Dr. Rodriguez began, her voice soft yet precise. Sarah's fingers traced invisible patterns on her jeans, a nervous habit she developed to map her internal landscape. The question was simple, but the answer was a minefield of potential revelations. Her initial responses were textbook, carefully constructed sentences that revealed nothing. "My parents are divorced. I spend weekends with my dad. My mom works hard." Each statement was a carefully placed brick in a defensive wall. But Dr. Rodriguez was patient. She recognized the performance for what it was, a carefully rehearsed script designed to protect something more fragile beneath. "And how do you feel about the upcoming custody hearing?" The question was strategically neutral, but its implications were profound. Sarah's micro-expressions became a language of their own. A slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw. These were not just reactions, they were encrypted messages waiting to be decoded. Dr. Rodriguez made a series of calculated observations. The way Sarah positioned herself, always with a clear view of the door, always ready to retreat. Her hypervigilance was not typical childhood anxiety. It was a survival mechanism, finely tuned from years of navigating emotional minefields. Psychological evaluation forms are typically black and white, checkboxes and scaled responses, but Sarah's story existed in the margins, in the spaces between standardized questions. She spoke about her father in carefully measured terms: success, expectations, achievement. The words were Robert's, not Sarah's. Dr. Rodriguez recognized a child who had learned to ventriloquize her father's narrative as a form of self-preservation. When she asked about specific memories, Sarah's responses became a masterclass in controlled revelation, enough detail to seem genuine, not enough to expose the full truth. "Your father seems very successful," Dr. Rodriguez noted, watching Sarah's reaction. A millisecond of tension, a barely perceptible shift in breathing. In that moment, Dr. Rodriguez understood that success for Sarah was not a measure of achievement, but a weapon of psychological control. The evaluation was more than a professional assessment. It was an intricate dance of revelation and concealment, with Sarah leading, her silence more powerful than any spoken testimony. Something was coming. Dr. Rodriguez could feel it with the same certainty she felt the Arizona heat pressing against the clinic's windows. A truth was preparing to break free, and when it did, nothing would remain the same. Robert's legal team arrived like a precision-engineered machine. Lead attorney Marcus Holloway, a Harvard-educated litigator with a reputation for surgical courtroom dismantling, spread their strategic documents across the defense table with calculated deliberation. Their arsenal was formidable. Financial records showed Robert as the model of fiscal responsibility. Meticulously crafted character statements from Phoenix's most influential business leaders painted him as a philanthropic single father fighting against systemic bias. Each document was a weapon, strategically designed to penetrate any potential challenge. The first witness was Thomas Reynolds, Robert's longtime business partner. Distinguished, silver-haired, wearing a custom Brioni suit that screamed old money credibility, he delivered testimony that was equal parts character endorsement and calculated performance. "Robert Martinez is not just a business associate," Reynolds declared, his voice resonating with manufactured sincerity. "He's a model of parental dedication. I've watched him navigate single fatherhood with remarkable grace and commitment." Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's court-appointed attorney, recognized the performance for what it was, a carefully choreographed narrative designed to obliterate any potential counter-argument. Each statement was a precisely placed landmine, waiting to detonate any challenge to Robert's carefully constructed image. The financial documentation was particularly insidious. Spreadsheets showed Robert consistently paying child support, making strategic investments in Sarah's future. Highlighted sections demonstrated educational savings, consistent medical insurance coverage, birthday gifts meticulously documented. What the documents didn't show were the psychological mechanisms of control. The emotional currency Robert traded in, manipulation masked as parental guidance, couldn't be captured in neat columns and rows. Judge Catherine Hernandez listened with the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen countless such performances, but even her seasoned perception was being tested by the surgical precision of Robert's legal strategy. Sarah watched from the gallery, her green eyes cataloging every gesture, every carefully modulated tone. She understood something the adults in the room had not yet realized. That truth was not about documentation, but about the spaces between the words. The momentum in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Robert's narrative of victimhood was becoming increasingly convincing. Elena looked smaller with each passing moment, her public defender seemingly outmaneuvered at every turn. But beneath the surface, something was building. A pressure system of suppressed truth, ready to break through the carefully constructed facade. Sarah's hands, resting quietly in her lap, were absolutely still, and in that stillness lay a storm waiting to be unleashed. Time seemed to crystallize in that moment. The courtroom's ambient noise, shuffling papers, whispered conversations, the distant hum of the air conditioning, dissolved into a singular point of absolute clarity. Sarah's body became a conduit of accumulated trauma. Years of carefully maintained silence transformed into potential energy, a psychological pressure system about to rupture. Her grandmother's hand, resting on her arm, felt distant, as if touching her through layers of protective glass. Robert continued his testimony, his voice a metronome of calculated sincerity. Each word was another brick in the wall of his constructed narrative, a story of devoted fatherhood systematically undermined by a bitter ex-wife. But something fundamental was changing. Sarah remembered the night that truly broke her. Not the dramatic scenes of confrontation, but a quiet moment 3 years ago. Her father, returning from a business trip, had sat in his home office, door slightly ajar. She had overheard a phone conversation that painted a different picture of the man everyone saw. "The financial reports need to be adjusted," he had said, his voice low and clinical. "Make sure nothing traces back to me." In that moment, she understood that truth was not about grand revelations, but about the quiet moments people believed no one was watching. Her body began to tremble, not with fear, but with a strange electric certainty. The courtroom's carefully maintained facade became transparent. She could see the invisible threads of manipulation, the strategic positioning of each witness, the calculated performance of her father. The court-appointed advocate seated beside her noticed the change first. A subtle shift in Sarah's posture, a dangerous light entering her eyes. Judge Hernandez was reviewing a document, her reading glasses perched precisely on the bridge of her nose. Robert's attorney continued his methodical destruction of Elena's credibility. And then, everything stopped. Sarah stood. The movement was so unexpected, so completely contrary to the courtroom's choreographed performance, that everyone froze. Her small frame seemed to expand, filled with a power that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with accumulated truth. Her voice, when it came, was not a scream, it was a declaration. De dy is lying. The courtroom transformed into a crucible of truth. Sarah's declaration hung in the air like electrical charge, every eye fixed upon her small frame, radiating an impossible intensity. "He's been lying about everything," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "The financial records, the child support, the whole narrative, it's all constructed." From her pocket, Sarah produced a meticulously organized manila envelope. Years of careful documentation, bank statements, intercepted emails, recorded phone conversations, fell onto the defense table like damning evidence. The first document showed a series of hidden transactions. Robert had been routing child support payments through complex shell companies, creating the illusion of financial compliance while systematically reducing actual funds. Forensic markers revealed strategic timing of transfers designed to appear legitimate while minimizing actual financial support. Another document exposed a network of legal maneuvers. Robert had been using his real estate connections to manipulate property assessments, creating a financial smokescreen that obscured his true economic capabilities. Text messages revealed a pattern of psychological manipulation, Conversations with Elena showed calculated emotional warfare, threats veiled as concern, financial pressure masked as parental guidance. Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's attorney, watched in stunned silence. What Sarah was presenting was more comprehensive than any legal strategy he could have constructed. Judge Hernandez leaned forward, her professional neutrality momentarily shattered by the raw authenticity of Sarah's revelation. Robert's attorney attempted intervention. "Objection, Your Honor. These are unverified." "Unverified?" Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through legal posturing. "I have metadata, timestamps, forensic trails. Each document is authenticated." She began detailing specific instances of financial manipulation, how her father had used his real estate development company to create complex financial structures that appeared legitimate, but were designed to minimize court-mandated support. The psychological profile emerged with devastating clarity. Robert wasn't just manipulating finances, he was conducting a systematic campaign of emotional and financial control. Each revelation was a surgical strike, dismantling the carefully constructed narrative piece by piece. The courtroom witnessed the deconstruction of a meticulously built facade, revealing the intricate machinery of manipulation beneath. The courtroom descended into controlled chaos. Judge Hernandez suspended the proceedings, ordering an immediate forensic financial investigation. Robert's carefully constructed persona crumbled under the weight of Sarah's evidence, each document a hammer strike against his fabricated narrative. The Arizona State Bar would later launch an investigation into Robert's legal and financial practices. His real estate development firm faced potential criminal charges for financial fraud and systematic misrepresentation. Elena was granted full custody, with Robert's visitation rights severely restricted. The court-mandated psychological evaluation revealed a pattern of emotional manipulation that extended far beyond their immediate family. Sarah became the unexpected hero, not through dramatic confrontation, but through meticulous documentation. Her ability to collect, preserve, and present evidence demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence and strategic thinking far beyond her 12 years. Months after the hearing, Elena and Sarah began rebuilding their lives. The financial pressure that had defined their existence slowly lifted. Elena returned to school, pursuing a degree in forensic accounting, inspired by her daughter's remarkable revelation. Robert's professional reputation disintegrated. The same business network that had once celebrated him now distanced themselves, recognizing the systemic deception he had constructed. The most profound transformation happened within Sarah. She was no longer a victim of her family's narrative, but the architect of her own future. The experience had taught her that truth is not just about speaking, but about carefully collecting, understanding, and presenting evidence. In the end, a 12-year-old girl had dismantled a complex system of manipulation, proving that courage is not about volume, but about precision.